Hi, welcome back to EducateTube.com. My name is Sipsky, your host. Today I'll be talking about the Sony a6500 versus the Sony a7S II and why I sold my Sony a7S II and kept my Sony a6500. Now, if you're into photography and video, definitely keep Sony a6500. If it was Sony a6300, I would otherwise told you to sell it. But because now the a6500 has in-body stabilization and even additional extra feature that Sony a7S II doesn't have, the touchscreen. Okay, and of course the fast frame rate that it can take, 11 frames per second versus 4 or 5 frames per second in Sony a7S II. And the autofocus on this thing is amazing. So photography, there's no way you compare Sony a7S II to the a6500. A6500 for photography outperforms Sony a7S II for sure, hands down. I was even convinced that the Sony a7S II photography, when you do low light, would be better. But when I actually took a picture of the two, and I'll show you the comparison later on, the Sony a6500, when you do the zoom in between the two using the Sony f/85mm lens, you realize, at least when I saw the photos, that the Sony a6500 actually outperformed Sony a7S II. It's quite amazing. There was very little noise in the Sony a6500 versus a7S II. When you set it at like 12,800 ISO, 85 mils f/5.6 at a shutter speed of 1/125 of a second. And when I zoom in, I realize, wow, Sony a6500 actually does a pretty good job. In fact, better than the a7S II. Now, in terms of video, the Sony a7S II and a6500 at 12,800 ISO are the same. Okay, let me repeat that again. At 12,800 ISO, Sony a7S II and Sony a6500 does the same job. They both do S-Log 2 and 3. And both of them can do 1080p 120 frames per second. Okay, so in that case, if you're just doing at highest ISO is 12,800 ISO, then this camera, the a6500, is it. That's, unless of course you want to go further with the ISO, like up to 51,200 ISO, the Sony a7S II could do that, and with little noise. So if you can tolerate a little bit of noise at 51,200 ISO, then of course go with the Sony a7S II. However, the two stops that I'm talking about, 25,600 or 51,200 ISO, it has advantage over the Sony a6500. But most of us, I don't think we film above 12,800 ISO. In fact, 6,400 ISO is probably the limit that you want to go with. If you're very picky, right, with grains and all that in your film. There's some kind of technique, of course, you can do. You can do some color grading, add some film grain to it, and maybe that when you're filming at like 25,600, it will go away, right? But for me, 12,800 ISO is great enough. And for both the camera a7S II and a6500, you can tell the difference. If I show you a video that films at 12,800 ISO, both camera side by side, you won't be able to tell. All right, so at the end, that's why I picked the Sony a6500. It's super fast for photo, super fast for autofocus for both video and photos. It has 24 megapixel. When you zoom in, you can see all the details, right? I even did the comparison for the Sony a7R2, and yes, the a7R2 is better, 50% better when you zoom in. But even that, would you justify the double the price? Anyway, I have another video next week or the following weeks. I'll do comparison with a6500 to the Sony a7R2. But for now, let's have a look at my photo comparison and video low light comparison. And I hope that may convince you that a6500 is more than adequate for the job. Okay. In fact, be proud that you got a6500 instead of a7S II. You save, $2,000 more. All right. Okay, have a look at the photo I've taken with Sony a7S II and Sony a6500. The setting is shown here. Shutter speed 1/125th of a second, 12,800 ISO, using a Sony 85mm f5.6. Since Sony a6500 is a crop sensor, I had to zoom in for the Sony a7S2 about 1.5 times, and you can see now they're comparable in terms of size. Now if you look at the grain noise and you do the comparison, you can see that a6500 has a better control. In fact, I see very low grain, is very smooth compared to the a7S2. So in terms of photography, you can see here that the Sony a6500 does a better job. I was surprised too. I thought, because a7S2 is low noise camera for low lights, so you suspect that you should get a better quality of photography in low lights, but that's not the case here. In fact, I'm looking at the two photos and I see that a6500 does a better job. Okay, so photography wise, a6500 does a better job. Even with the best lens putting on both camera, we're talking about Sony 85mm f1.8 lens. Okay, let's move on to the video. Okay, so this is Sony a7S2, and it's at shutter speed of 1/50th, f1.8, ISO 1600 right now. Let's move it to, this is 3200. Have a look if there's any noise. Okay, we're going to move on to ISO 6400. Scan around, see if there's any noise. This is ISO 12,800. Scan around, see if there's any noise. This is ISO 25,600. And this is ISO 51,200. Scan around, see if you see any noise. So 51,200. Okay, so this is Sony a6500. The shutter speed is 1/50th, f1.8, starting ISO 1600. We're filming at full HD at 24 megabits per second, and this is like the Blu-ray quality type 1080p. Okay, 24 frames per second. So now it's ISO 1600. Let's move it up. This is now ISO 3200. So have a look, scan around. ISO 3200. This is now ISO 6400. Have a look, scan around. Focus on the watch, okay? If there's any kind of like fuzziness or speck of like dirt or something that show noise. This is 12,800. Okay, have a look. And this is as far as can go. 25,600. And I think it looks pretty good on the camera, but I'll try to see this on the big screen, see what happens. So have a look, compare this a6500 to the Sony a7S2.